Before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys all know that we now have a Twitter account. So if you're not already, go ahead and follow us at Boris Dirk Pod on Twitter. Enjoy the episode.
It's the Boris Dirk podcast. Today, we are going from the top of the standings to the bottom, or maybe the other way. I don't know. But we're going in some direction of the standings, talking swingers. Not extramarital fun, but each team in the NBA's swing player, the guy that we feel like means the most to their present or future, depending on the team's current status, what their near-term strategy is. So it'll probably make more sense as we go through each team, our logic for choosing a specific type of player, depending on where a team stands right now. So, Max, how are you?
I am good. My ACL recovery is coming along. I now no longer have to wear a brace outside of the house, so I feel like I'm a free man. And yeah, off season winds along, but the content machine continues.
Yep. And to be a little bit more clear, we're talking the guys that we think have the highest floor ceiling, lowest floor impact on their team's number one objective right now is probably the best way to put it.
Yes, if these teams are going for titles, it's the players who are kind of the swing pieces between whether they're just a solid playoff team or truly a team in contention. If it's a rebuilding team, these are kind of the young pieces that may swing the trajectory of their rebuild if they're just going to stall out, or if it's something that can lead to real playoff success down the line. So yeah, there's some of them are young guys, some of them are vets, new additions, mainstays, but yeah, we can just go through it.
I've thought through like 7 or 8 of these. I think Max has gone all across the league. So you set the table. I assume you want to start at the bottom.
Let's start at the bottom. That's where it's more interesting, honestly.
Yeah.
So we can start in the West. We'll go from the bottom to the top. San Antonio Spurs. I mean, the obvious answer is, does Victor live up to expectations as a rookie? Because if he doesn't, that's a much darker future. And if he does, then they're set. But for a less obvious choice, I'm going to go with Devin Vassell. It would just be good for them to see if he's a long-term building block on the wing. He's got great efficiency stats on catch and shoot, pull-up jumpers. He's pretty good. He's around like where Paul George is. And I just think as the young core continues to develop, they have a lot of kind of rangy options between Sohan, Victor, Keldon Johnson, but he's kind of like their scoring archetype player. And he could be a really valuable piece for them going forward to sort of be that prototypical 2 guard if he can continue to develop. I don't know if you thought about San Antonio or at all, but does anyone jump to mind for you?
I think it's got to be Sohan.
Yeah.
And it isn't just because I'll take any excuse just to say his name on our podcast. Wemby is, the most logical answer, but for me, it just comes down to, can he stay healthy with that weird physique? And so that seems like a boring swinger call. If Wemby's healthy for a long period of time, like I do believe he's a really, really rare player. Sohan, on the other hand, like has been durable his couple of years in the basketball limelight so far. I would just love to see his jumper start to come along a little bit more in year 2. He was already a plus defender as a rookie, which is very rare. And he has a lot of room to grow on offense, but showed flashes of a lot of interesting playmaking. He's a really good driver and he's switchable on D. And I think right now he's the guy who is he's one of the least talked about, like potential championship second or third best guys, I think, in the league right now. Because all the talk has been about Wemby. I think people forget like just how fun the Spurs young core was before Wemby even got picked a few weeks ago. A couple months ago now. Jeez. So yeah. But even if Sohan doesn't develop a jumper, I just want to see him continue to push the ball in transition. He's a guy who can rebound it and go. And like, I don't know. I just want a crazy jump from year 1 to year 2, which often isn't the case even for future greats. But if he averaged 4 assists this year, I wouldn't be surprised. That's how impressive his handle and mobility is for his size. And I'm excited to see what he looks like around more talent.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, him and Victor long term could just be an insane defensive front court. There's another team at the bottom of the West that I'm going to talk about with one of their swing factors coming up with a similar kind of defensive profile going forward. But yeah, I could see either Vassell or Sohan for that one. All right, we're going to try to go through these somewhat quickly if we want to get through all 30 teams. But the next one for Houston, I'm going to say, I feel like the pretty obvious answer, we could go two ways here, I think, is Jalen Green. Um, I feel like they should. We talked about this. Well, actually, no. There's the 2021 redraft episode, which never aired because it was lost to the audio of Zoom. But a lot of these guys from the 2021 draft, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, we're kind of approaching now or never territory for them a bit going into year three, where not necessarily for just being useful NBA players, but if these guys are going to be real long term all NBA level studs, this is kind of the year where we should see that. Um, Mobley, we've probably seen it the most out of all those guys to this point, and I'm going to bring him up more a little bit later. But Jalen Green, can he be the number one scorer on Houston and have them actually be good? Or is he
Yeah.
just kind of prototypical empty calories wing scorer? Like Rockets Twitter definitely thinks he's like Devin Booker, where everyone was shitting on him because he was in a bad team. But in reality, he's just sort of a victim of his circumstance and he is really good. Whereas, some of the efficiency metrics are not quite as rosy on him and he certainly has some kind of approach issues in terms of defense and playmaking, which hopefully Ime Udoka will be able to coach out of him. But this year is going to be really key for him to sort of show he can take that next step to being sort of a real valuable contributor. And he'll have Fred VanVleet to kind of guide him a little bit. There's other young guys who are going to be trying to make an imprint on this team, but I went with Jalen Green for them.
It was close, but Alperen Şengün was more important to the Rockets' point differential last year than Jalen Green was. I think when Alperen was off the floor, they were like half a point worse than when Jalen was off the floor. And I love Alperen Şengün, so he's my pick. And I'm scared about his future defensive ability as this team gets better and moves toward a team that actually needs to win. Can he be the anchor of your team defensively in the playoffs? We don't know yet, but seeing him do some stuff in the last few weeks for Turkey has only reignited my deep love for his offensive bag. And I think that he's so special offensively that this question about his defense is even more pressing than I had previously thought. Like what he does against like grown men in this World Cup is worth watching, and it's TikTok ready because in short spurts his passing game, his handling in the paint is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So Şengün, he's my guy because I think Şengün's ceiling is so high, and because he's a big man and there are real question marks about his defensive mobility, his floor is actually still pretty low. Like
Yeah.
he could be Naz Reid, and he could be the closest thing we've ever seen to Nikola Jokic. I don't think he's
Right.
ever going to be close to Jokic, but he could be the closest thing we've ever seen to him.
Yeah. And the bar, like if you're not going to be if you're going to be a bad defensive center, the bar for how good you have to be offensively for that not to matter is so ridiculously high. Like, I mean, Jokic is even an average or above average defender, but you think about someone like Nikola Vucevic, who's honestly probably one of the more skilled centers the NBA has ever seen, but he just kind of, or
Exactly.
maybe putting it a little bit too strongly, but he's a very skilled center. And just with the modern NBA, he just kind of gets lost in the shuffle where there's probably 15, 16 centers I'd rather have instead of him just because he's so bad defensively that how good he is on offense doesn't make up for that. Just that position is so important. So I could see Şengün being the pick there because if he's passable enough on defense and Jabari can kind of make up for some of that, where that can be a real kind of anchoring point for them going forward, then that also could sort of be their bread and butter.
Yeah. Um, at that size, the passing is literally up there with Bill Walton, Jokic. The question is, can he weaponize it in the right ways to become a winning player?
Yeah. All right, next up is Portland. I believe Scoot Henderson's going to be awesome, so I don't really think he's a swinger. I just kind of feel like I know what he's going to be. So I feel like it has to be Shaden Sharp. He might have the widest gulf in the entire NBA between his floor and his ceiling. Off the top of my head, at least, he's similar to Jalen Green, although he's proven much less to this point, which I guess makes sense because he's a rookie. But he's got all the talent, all the tools, the athleticism, the shooting stroke, the head at the rim dunks, but you've got to see improvements that lend you to think that that all-star ceiling is really attainable this year. Improvements with process, mentality, intensity, playmaking, all that, even just defense. Like he's got to progress his game where it's not just pull up long jumpers and the occasional highlight dunk. Um, and yeah, basically it's like, is he going to be kind of more towards that Vince Carter mold or more towards Gerald Green? Because I feel like that's kind of the floor and the ceiling for him right now. And, Gerald Green was one of the most athletic players we've ever seen and a really good 3-point shooter, but just never put it all together in the same way where he could become a real sort of consistent contributor for teams. So that's kind of what's on the table for Shaden. He doesn't have to kind of make that leap to Vince Carter this year, but he's got to show that he's at least going in that direction for Portland's future to really look like it can.
Yeah, and I like the Vince Carter mention. It's hard to think about him in the context Shaden about Shaden in the context of Vince's career because Vince entered the league at 22. So I as soon as you said that, I went and looked at Vince Carter's rookie stats, but it was a 22-year-old Vince, and he was like what 18, 6, and 3. Yeah. Obviously different era, different level of preparation. I'm totally with you on all of that. It's Shaden, and yeah, I just want him to come out with tenacity and not also I think that there's this misconception now that like Dame will be traded before the season or early in the season now, who the hell knows? And then Shaden like should take 20 shots a game. And I'm just not there. I think
Yeah.
part of his growth as like a really poor man's Anthony Edwards is to refine his shot selection and become a better decision maker. And I don't see why we need to ratchet up his volume a crazy amount before he's finding efficiency at lower volume. Um,
Yes.
and I'm just less worried about Scoot. Is Scoot the best
Yeah.
player on a championship team? Most likely not. Only a few of those on the planet, but I'm just pretty certain that Scoot at the worst is a long time really good starting point guard. And hopefully is much more than that.
Yeah. I
Shaden is the one, like you said, the magnitude, the difference between ceiling and floor are just really scary and intoxicating right now for Blazers fans. Also, just going back a second, you mentioned the lost footage from our recent, what was it? The redraft,
2021 redraft.
2021 redraft. And I was thinking, like, I just listened to this Russillo episode where he was reminiscing on the Scott Van Pelt days, which
Mhm.
usually when he does that, I just delete the podcast because I know it's not an episode for me. But they were talking about like some great interview they had that was lost due to technical difficulties,
Mm.
and I felt his pain in a way that I wouldn't have a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Podcasting is gut wrenching stuff.
Yeah. We actually lost that episode twice, so we'll see if we ever bring it back.
Oh yeah, the first time was Max's internet.
Yeah.
Okay, keep it
Moving
moving.
on. Utah. This one, a little harder to pick someone. I picked Taylor Hendricks, the guy they just picked at ninth. I think going forward, they have the potential for a really dominant defensive front court with him and Walker Kessler together. And I kind of would like to see flashes of that this year. At the same time, he's a rookie. I kind of feel like I feel like I know pretty well what he's going to be in the NBA. I feel like his floor and ceiling are pretty close to each other, kind of the opposite of Shaden Sharp, where I think he's going to be a good shooter. He's going to be a good rim protector. And I'm not really sure he's going to be able to do much else. But those two things, which are really coveted skill sets in the modern NBA, I think he'll be good at. And yeah, I mean, for the Jazz this year is all about just seeing their youth. Like Keontae George is another person you could pick just because with his skill set, if he hits, he could be a more useful player for sure. And then just seeing if Lauri Markkanen can maintain what he did last year. Does anyone jump out on the Jazz for you besides Hendricks?
I mean, I mentioned on a recent episode that I'm like just mesmerized looking deeper and deeper into Lauri Markkanen's last season. And so I too really want to know like what he's gonna do now. What's next for him as the focal point of every scouting report. But I chose Walker Kessler because I feel like I'm a little bit less sold than everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, at what point is he an elite rim protector long enough that he gets paid a lot, and then we treat him like Rudy Gobert? There have been I didn't really get I don't remember a lot of him in college. I feel like I've heard people say that he has decent touch, like shooting potential, but I'm just not. He didn't shoot threes as a rookie. I have no reason to think that that's coming anytime soon. So like he's not like a Miles Turner type. He really and so yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen to Walker Kessler. The centers that are really worth, those hundreds of millions of dollar contracts are guys that showed offensive superpowers from the jump. Like early Jokic was showing crazy flashes, early Embiid, even, when he wasn't hurt, was flashing shit early. And who is Walker Kessler?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how high his ceiling is yet. And I'll be honest, I don't feel like I have a great sense of his switchability because I wasn't watching the Jazz a lot last year in the second half of the season.
Mhm.
Uh, so I'm just interested. I'm just interested. Does Walker Kessler just look so great because he's the significant other who came after Rudy Gobert? Um, or is he going to be a better player than Gobert, which is highly unlikely. Like Gobert's career is going to age very well when we
Yeah.
look back at the trophies he's lined up.
Yeah. No, he's probably going to make the Hall of Fame, and I don't think people are ready for that. Um, I, yeah, I mean, when I was watching him in college, he reminded me kind of Jakob Pertl, a just sort of like very good rim protecting center who, without much offensive skill, um, I remember him taking some threes in college. I don't remember how effective he was at them, but yeah, I don't know if he's going to work on incorporating that into his game, but
Yeah.
yeah, he's kind of like Brooke Lopez minus the offensive skill. So it's
But it's
like,
like that's why something's a little fishy to me because he
mhm,
went to Auburn and he couldn't quite cut it for Bruce Pearl. Or no, sorry. He went to UNC, couldn't cut it for UNC, then went to Auburn, and that's where he figured shit out. Was one of the best shot blockers in the country, defensive players in general, blah blah blah. And now I'm just wondering, um, yeah, is he because Jakob Pertl's an awesome player,
mhm,
but we're talking about him a lot if he's Jakob Pertl.
yeah, I agree with that. Or Mitchell Robinson, that's another kind of
Yeah,
comparison for him.
and I've never loved Mitchell Robinson more,
Mhm,
but we don't talk about Mitchell Robinson nearly as much as Walker Kessler.
very true. All right. Next up is Dallas. This is a team where it's kind of like the entire roster outside of Kyrie and Luca is the swing factor for them. Um, to pick one player, I said Maxi Kleber, because he honestly, for when in that run to the conference finals a couple years ago, he was probably their third most important player after Luca and Brunson. Just in the way that he was kind of able to anchor their small ball lineups playing the five. He could protect the rim. When they played the Clippers in the playoffs 2 years in a row, he was the primary defender. Well, it was him and Finney Smith who were guarding Kawhi and Paul George. Like they use him to guard wings, they use him to protect the rim. And he was hurt for a lot of last year, and they really kind of fell off a cliff, especially defensively, once he got hurt. So I don't think any of the centers currently on the team are really going to be able to anchor them in the playoffs. Like Lively, I think it'll take a couple years for him to kind of mentally grab the game. Powell just is after the Achilles tear. He's just never was like kind of that guy to anchor you in a playoff series. And Rashawn Holmes similarly, like maybe they'll trade for Clint Capella, because there's been a lot of rumblings about that. But if not, I think their best move is probably going to be to close with Luca, Kyrie, Grant Williams. Kleba, and then whatever wing they have, whatever 3-and-D wing has it going, whether that's Josh Green or Dante Exum or whoever. But I think Kleba might kind of be the linchpin of that a little bit, where he can try to anchor their defense and kind of give them some spacing, and that might actually raise their ceiling quite a bit. So he's who I picked. I don't know if anyone jumps out from Dallas for you.
Yeah, I put down the rookies,
Mhm.
uh, plural. Omax Prosper and Derek Lively, because I had top 16 grades on both of them. I had Omax at 12, so he was one of my steals of the draft. I thought as soon as we got past the potential future star tier of this past draft, like Omax was one of my favorite guys. And so yeah, it's just really important to see how good those guys look early. Um, Obviously, if they look really good early, but they're just rookies, and even really good rookies are hard to win with, there's still better trade value. And maybe Kyrie is rolling somehow, and the team looks really good, and they want to make like a win now move. I
Mhm.
doubt they would deal both those guys, but maybe they would deal one of them.
Yeah.
Uh, Maintain some future, some potential growth. And yeah, so I just want to see how good those guys are, what it means for their trade chips, and also, if they can fit into the Luka timeline. We've talked about this before. Luka's obviously ready to be the best player on a contender right now, and Omax looks ready to play. Lively looks a couple of years away. I agree with you. The front court is scary, which makes me think like Lively's going to have to play some significant minutes this year.
Mhm.
Especially because Grant Williams can't be your five against everyone.
Right.
Even if I think they're getting a really good Grant Williams, but it's a diminished Dwight Powell, and yeah, so that's where I'm at. The rookies are their swings.
Yep. All right. Get that. All right. The last, or now we're getting into the play-in and playoff teams from last year. So OKC, I went with Chet Holmgren. He's by far the biggest addition he's the only addition to their team this year, really, besides Kasem Wallace, and Vasily Micic. But theoretically, he's the perfect five for this team. He can grab and go off of rebounds. He can theoretically give them spacing like Muscala gave them last year. Their kind of 5-out lineups with Muscala at center had really insane lineup data last year. So he can sort of give them that sort of theoretically, he can give them that spacing while also anchoring the rim protection. So if he kind of lives up to that theoretical ceiling that he has, and we've seen a lot in the past with these guys who missed their rookie year, their second year is much like they usually come in more ready their second year than most rookies. Like we should probably expect him to produce better than a normal rookie would. If you think of Blake Griffin when he played in his second year, or Joel Embiid, or Ben Simmons, even like they've had some time with NBA strength and conditioning. So I'm not going to treat him just like a rookie where he probably won't contribute to winning. But that team already was surprisingly good on defense last year. Like they were around average without really having a rim protector. And if he can get in there, protect the rim, provide spacing and playmaking on offense, I think he can be a pretty seamless fit for them. So he was my pick for them.
Yeah, give me Giddy. I'm just a little bit concerned about his lack of shooting next to a couple of lower volume shooters. I've talked about that one before. But Giddy is definitely one of their 5 or 6 best players already, and so I'm just really interested to see, can he play next to SGA, J Dub, Chat, and is the floor spaced properly?
For sure.
Um, yeah.
All right. Yeah. New Orleans, is there anyone besides Zion Williamson? Like maybe you've just totally written him off, but it's like they're a home court team with him and they're a play-in team without him. It's like he's the ultimate swinger because when he's on the court, they were first in the West with him last year, like a +4 net rating with him on the court, which isn't awesome, but none of the net ratings in the league last year were that crazy. Like that's pretty good. Especially for a team that ended up as 9 seed. And it's make or break for him this year. All the offseason photos are circulating again, and he looks like he's in shape, but we'll see how long that lasts. And we'll see if his body can just handle exploding with as much force as he generates every time he moves, which I know is what concerned you with him ever since he came into the league, ever since he ripped through his shoe at Duke, honestly, probably. Um, so yeah, I mean, you could say other of their young guys, like maybe they can raise their ceiling going forward if they get better, but I feel like it has to be Zion, both for their possible contention this year and anything going forward.
Cam Whitmore is not Zion athletically, but he's another guy who lands in ways that scare me. And that's without even 19 teams saying the medicals are too scary for us to pick Cam Whitmore. But Zion, yeah, that feels a little bit too close to like the Wemby one I mentioned. Like if he's healthy, Zion's going to be good. Um, but he probably won't be available for whatever reason. I don't expect him to play more than 50 games for a whole bunch of reasons at this point. Give me Dyson Daniels.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm just excited to find out if he's an elite role player or a legit star.
Yep.
His floor looks so high because of how useful he already is, how toolsy he is defensively. But the offensive pop that we saw in Summer League, the shooting that he showed in the G League at times, and facilitation at like 6'8" and shredded is rare. Those are a rare combination of things. And he's one of my favorite young players in the league right now.
That's very fair. All right, we're getting into the playoff teams now from last year. Minnesota. This one I feel like I had one pretty clear choice, which is Jaden McDaniels. He's already, if you talk or if you hear other players talk about who are the best defenders in the league, he already gets named as one of the best wing defenders in the league. He's in that conversation with Drew Holiday and Dylan Brooks, although he fouls a lot, but he's definitely a good wing defender. And Mikal Bridges, all these guys. Everyone names Jaden McDaniels too. And I really think that Minnesota can build a winner around the defensive foundation of Ant, McDaniels, and Gobert. And it's just Cat, which really throws kind of a monkey wrench into everything. But McDaniels shot 40% from three last year. He's already one of the best 3-and-D options in the league. He can make even further strides on offense. He had a very low pull-up volume last year, but he shot like less than, I think he shot he basically didn't shoot any pull-ups, but he shot a decent field goal percentage on the ones that he did, about one a game. And he's already kind of similar to that Andrew Wiggins, OG Anunoby level. And if he can elevate above that to like that Mikal Bridges, or even if it's possible, like if there's some Jaylen Brown in there, if he can get to that next level of his development, he's still only 22 years old, that can really elevate their ceiling going forward. I posted on Twitter the other day, follow us on Twitter at Boris Dirk Pod, a fake trade for Dame going to Minnesota, which had them sending out McDaniels and Cat. And a few members of Minnesota Timberwolves Twitter just went crazy, being like, why would we throw in McDaniels to the deal? And I was sort of thinking like, no, you're not throwing him in, but you got to pay to get someone to take on Cat. But anyways, McDaniels, I think if he really hits, he has all-star ceiling. And if they have him and Edwards to build around long-term, that could sort of be a Brown and Tatum-esque sort of duo if McDaniels really hits his ceiling.
Yeah, put some respect on Andrew Wiggins and Jaylen Brown. No, I Jaylen Brown took a little while to become the guy he is now, obviously. Wiggins, I want to give a little bit more grace because he was going through some stuff last year, but we're still only 2 years removed from him being the second best player on a championship team. On McDaniels, he's played 212 games in the NBA already, and he still hasn't averaged 2 free throws per game in a season. Like, I feel like we'd see more off the bounce. His shooting is there. I think like his floor is higher than Dyson Daniels, but I think I'd rather bet on Dyson Daniels becoming a star. Um, just because of his spice with the ball in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the call. I actually abstain from picking a swinger for the Minnesota Timberwolves because I dislike this team so much. I'm sorry to be a hater. I'm so low on both Cat and Gobert, and
Yeah.
neither of those is a hot take. It's just sad. I want them to trade one or both because Ant is Ant. And
Yeah.
yeah, and don't sleep on McDaniels. I think you're right to point out like he's 22 and you know, he like to my point about Shaden not needing to jack up his volume until he can be efficient at lower volume. Like McDaniels is there. He was basically 50, 40, 75 last year.
Yeah.
Um, but he only averaged 12 points a game. So like let's see what happens with more of a workload.
Hmm.
And maybe there's a team out there willing to give you something for Cat,
Yeah.
something that isn't like Russell Westbrook.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the Lakers. This one, I don't really feel like they have a swinger. Like maybe Austin Reeves takes a step, but I kind of feel like I know what he is. I kind of feel like I know who everyone on their team is. It's just a question of health. And I guess Gabe Vincent, if he can maintain his shooting from this year's playoffs, and if he's the guy he was in the playoffs all season for them, then he's kind of the perfect off guard with LeBron and Reeves. And that Vincent, Reeves, LeBron, Davis, and pick your fifth between Hachimura or Vanderbilt or sorry, not Troy Brown, Torian Prince. Um, that's a really good lineup, but it all comes down to health. Like if LeBron and AD are healthy with their role players come playoff time, as long as they don't run up against Jokic, I think they're going to be a really tough out because they don't have anyone on their team who can really bang with Jokic. AD showed he's not quite strong enough for that. Um, Although he is probably the best defensive player in the league, but no one has anyone on their team who can guard Jokic. So as long as they can avoid the Nuggets, I think they're going to be a really tough out in the playoffs, and I think they're going to be better than they were last year. But yeah, I just had health and Gabe Vincent.
All right, for the nerds, Max Christie. He's probably
Yeah,
gonna end up playing like 7 minutes a game this year, but yeah, I he blew my mind in summer league, and he was an elite prospect. I think he had a disappointing 1 year at Michigan State in certain regards, but he might be really good.
yeah,
And he's got an NBA body, and shooting looks legit. So Max Christie for the Blog Boys.
very fair. All right, Golden State. I picked Andrew Wiggins, who we were just talking about. Clay is declining, but also I think his decline has been a bit overstated. Like his stats aren't that different from what he was before his injury. It just tends to be a little bit more inconsistent, and the defense isn't quite there, but it's not horrible. Um, but they need Andrew Wiggins to kind of take on a bigger burden and be the guy that he was in those last two rounds of their championship run a couple years ago. They really missed him last year when he was out with his personal issue. And I was looking at his stats for the playoffs, and they were actually pretty good. They were pretty similar to how he has stats from the 2022 playoffs, but I just didn't really feel his presence as much in the run last year. So I feel like he kind of has to get back to impacting the game as much as he was in that 2022 season for them to, and he's going to have a big burden on him this year defensively, especially if they're throwing out that Clay, Chris Paul, Steph Curry lineup with him and Draymond. Like him and Draymond are going to have to do some real heavy lifting defensively and rebounding. So I'm curious to see if he can do that. Yeah. Does anyone jump out on Golden State for you?
Wiggins, I think, yeah, that seems right. I'm just really interested to see what Chris Paul like what happens. What happens when you put CP in that locker room? Uh, is he good enough to play closing minutes next to Steph defensively? Probably not. So what does it mean emotionally for your team when Chris Paul is on the bench? Because it's never happened before.
Yeah.
When Chris Paul is on the bench in the playoffs, it's because he's hurt, but not because he isn't good enough to close.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking. And can they get off of him? That's less about him, but that spot, if they want to trade him because they just have no faith in that defensive backcourt, that makes sense to me. Um, but I can also envision a world where he does wonders for them as a leader and still eats up a lot of valuable minutes. Does things he's done for other teams when his co-stars are off the floor.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a smaller scale version of what D'Antoni was trying to do with the Rockets a few years ago, where he always had 48 minutes of like Hall of Fame point guard play between Chris Paul and James Harden. Where I mean, the Warriors' bugaboo for years has been that when Steph hits the bench, they just like fall off a cliff.
Yeah.
Even when they had KD, that was the case where they were like historically great with Steph on the court and just kind of like treaded water when Steph was on the bench. And if anyone can come in and just like uh run a team like competently, it's Chris Paul. So I guess they want him to be basically a better version of what Jordan Poole was, where he can run the offense when Steph's off the court and have it kind of humming, and it'll probably look different. It'll be more pick and roll. Some of the guys on the Warriors like Draymond and Iguodala have talked about how Chris Paul can do wonders for Kuminga and kind of getting him going as a roll man and hitting him on lobs and things like that. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And Kuminga's the guy I would have mentioned probably like a year ago. I
Yeah.
think like I'm just 1 year out now on expecting Kuminga to pan out as a draft pick.
Mhm.
We're at scary hours with him. And to your point about the Rockets, Harden and CP, I actually think Steph is probably a better defender now than prime James Harden.
Yeah.
Different type of defender, but that was a CP who was past his prime, but still like bulldog, closer to like a Kyle Lowry type defender.
Yeah. He was
Um,
still a plus defender at that point for sure,
yeah,
I'd say.
exactly. Um, so yeah, it's really tough to know what's going to happen to them defensively. So I that's one of those things we'll need to see before we make crazy statements about it.
Yeah. All right. The Clippers. I guess we don't know if they're going to have James Harden on their team or not, but I'm just going to go ahead and say Kawhi's knees. Um, he came back in the playoffs last year, looked like a top three player again. He was outplaying both Kevin Durant and Devin Booker in the two playoff games that he played before getting hurt again. And last time we saw him before that, he was leading the Clippers over the Mavs, where he had a historic performance to stave off elimination and then win in game 7. And then he led them over the Jazz when the Jazz had the best record in the NBA before partially tearing his ACL. When he plays, he's awesome. He looks like an MVP, first team All NBA level player who can be the best player in any given playoffs, like not just a playoff round, but the entire playoffs. He can be the best player in the league. But at this point, it's just hard to trust it lasting for more than a round. Even for a full round, like we haven't seen that since 2021. And if the Clippers are going to win a title, which they are capable of doing with the team that they have, it's because his knees hold up and he's able to play like Kawhi for a full playoff, four rounds of the playoffs. But that's kind of what it all comes down to, which is a pretty tough spot to be when you look at Kawhi's history, and he's played very few full seasons since about 2016.
Yeah, totally with you. I think about 2019 Kawhi all the time. Like he wasn't even 100% as a Raptor, and it was still one of the best finals performances I've ever seen. Even though the Warriors had died in basketball terms. So yeah, I it's just I don't fucking know. I don't fucking know what's going on with the Clippers, and I've picked them like twice to win the title in this
Yeah.
last half decade of injury despair. Uh, is I loved Terrence Mann. I loved him out of his draft. I've loved him the whole way, but why do we talk about him like he's like a blue chip trade asset? I feel like that's just something Steve Ballmer wants to believe.
Yeah.
I guess, he's in that conversation. But I think that he's a really good role player, and we kind of spoil the magic of a player like Terrence Mann when we start wondering, like, can he be an all-star? Because I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
Yeah.
He came into the league relatively old, for NBA standards, and he's already 26. He's a great player. I mentioned a potential cat trade involving Russ earlier. Obviously, that was a slip of the mind because Russ is no longer getting paid the big contract.
Mm-hmm.
A cat trade for the Clippers would be more like Zubats, Norm Powell, and Terrence Mann, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got to be Kawhi and Paul George. It's just got to be the stars because that's their whole fucking roster.
Yeah.
You look at this team and they've got two, like, is PG a Hall of Famer?
Probably. He'll probably end up being a Hall of Famer, but I don't know actually.
I feel like when I start looking at recent guys who've gotten in, he's close.
Yeah.
But yeah, Clippers, it's the two superstars, and this could be the year it all blows up.
Yeah. And Kawhi, I was thinking about this because there's been a lot of like all-time rankings coming out. And I feel like Kawhi is just going to have such a weird career historically because he's going to be recognized as an all-time great because he has those two finals MVPs. But
And because January Jones posts him on her Instagram story once a year.
yes, but I feel like if he hadn't gotten hurt, it would be he'd be in that KD debate as like who the second best wing was behind LeBron of this era. Like I feel like Kawhi at his peak and KD at his peak were pretty close in terms of quality.
Oh, dude,
Um,
I'll say it. 2019 Finals Kawhi is more impressive to me as a single series performance than anything KD ever did against the Cavs
yeah.
because of the guys KD had around him. Steph's the punching bag for a couple of those series. Fuck you, Steph haters. I know we have a couple listening right now, but yeah, I think that's why it's so weird because we've been talking about how Jimmy's going to be a weird conversation in a few years, that he could dance with the superstars at his peak, which he totally can.
Mhm.
But like Kawhi hit an even different stratosphere in 2019.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of KD, going to Phoenix. I said basically who's the fifth guy, like the other starting wing. We know they're going to be trotting out Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton, assuming DeAndre Ayton doesn't have a mental breakdown. But who's the other starting wing going to be? Is it going to be Eric Gordon? That feels like playing him, Booker, Beal, Durant just feels like a lot of the same type of player. And he's been playing really well for the Bahamas in the World Cup. I'm not sure if he's still kind of that level of player that he was on the Rockets sort of many years ago. And just defensively, that feels kind of rickety. And then offensively, just it's a lot of jump shots. It feels like it might kind of replicate that what was wrong with the Clippers back in their sort of when they were healthy, but still not able to get over the hump, where it was just very reliant on jump shots and not really getting to the rim. And even if you have the best jump shooters in the world, still you have to be able to generate looks at the rim to kind of generate really efficient offense. So basically, who's that fifth guy is going to be, because he's going to have to shoulder a lot defensively as well. So it's going to be Eric Gordon, Keita Bates-Diop, Watanabe, Torrey Craig. Like, who's it going to be?
Yeah. Beal strikes my fancy just because we haven't seen him in this role, period. And that'll be really interesting to see because he's getting a chance to play a completely new role while he still should be in his physical prime. Like this should be peak Beal. His stats have taken slight steps backwards in the last year or two, but there's no reason to believe he isn't still like an absurd third option offensively to
Right.
have.
Yeah. I'm very curious to see how they look this year in general.
I love Keita Bates' job. And if a Kogi can't shoot and Eric Gordon is washed, which I don't think Eric Gordon is washed, but it's possible. Keita Bates' job is a guy who could slide in there and play real minutes. Like he could be that like sixth, seventh, eighth playoff guy who really takes them to another level.
Yep.
Because there's been a lot of painful campaign and not champagne the
Mm-hmm.
last couple of years. A lot of moments where you're like, damn, they're down to a Damian Lee. And they look stocked up on the depth chart a little bit more this year.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Next up, we got three teams left in the West. We got Sacramento up next. I mean, they haven't really added much new. They added Sasha Vezenkov from the Euro League. I don't really know much about him. Maybe he's a swinger, but I feel like their main avenue for internal improvement is Keegan Murray. I feel like Fox and Sabonis are pretty set as players. I would be surprised if they play above the level they were at last year. If anything, I could see them taking a slight step back. Especially Fox. Sabonis, maybe not because he was playing through a thumb injury, but I could see Fox taking a step back with some of the efficiency numbers, unless he's just like an elite mid-range shooter now. But Keegan Murray, I was not the highest on his ceiling coming into the league. Somewhat iconically, I had EJ Liddell over him in my draft rankings, and I still haven't been proven wrong. But he's 23, so he's not super young. As far as like he's older than Jaden McDaniels, for instance, even though it feels like McDaniels has been in the league for 4 years. But can Keegan be more than that kind of really good connective piece, or is he just going to be that? Like his shooting is better than I thought it was going to be. He's got great size, so he can be a good defender. He's smart. And yeah, I've been listening to podcasts with like people saying that they view him as like an all-star, future all-star type of player, which would still really surprise me, I think. I don't see that kind of level of creation and sort of physical dominance from him that would lend to being an all-star, but there's no doubting he had a fantastic rookie year and the shooting is real. So if any improvement is going to come internally, I think it's from him.
Yeah. I had Keegan Murray, I think like 6 on my board in his class. I did not think he was going to be this special a shooter, especially this soon.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on a lot of that. I'm going boring here. I'm going Sabonis because we're going to talk about Donovan Mitchell when we get to the Cavs, but Sabonis is a guy who I'm just like, what's next?
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see what the next act is for Sabonis. I'm not the biggest De'Aaron Fox guy in terms of like the tier that he's established himself in. Like I feel like he's in that scary bottom of a tier position where, as fun as the Kings were last year, they might find themselves in purgatory in the near future with like how good but not great they are.
Yeah.
I've been a Kings hater, I would say. But they fought hard in that Warriors series. I think, yeah, Sabonis looked like a guy who becomes much less valuable in the playoffs, and that's why I'm so intrigued by him. Like his defense was put more on an island as like a below average trait, and he wasn't healthy for that whole series, so I don't want to be too harsh. But I'm just really interested to see what this does to his confidence if he comes back stronger, or if we remember this in a few years as like an inflection point where we just had to accept that his ascent had kind of finished.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about, or when I was making my point with Vucevic relating to Şengün about like how good you have to be offensively for being bad defensively as a center not to matter. Like Sabonis is kind of the ultimate test case for that because he really is like incredibly skilled as an offensive center. And if he can't kind of anchor a team in that way where they can be really good. I mean, the Kings were really good last year, but where they can be like real title contenders, that is a little damning for Şengün, I think. It just shows he has to kind of elevate his defense to be at a higher level than someone like Sabonis is, because Sabonis is one of the more skilled centers again that we've ever seen. And it's sort of an open question still of whether you can build like a real contender around him. I think the Kings are going to regress a bit next year. We've seen this a lot. It seems like every year there's a team that kind of really exceeds expectations, and then everyone gets out over their skis a little bit with them, and they kind of fall back down to earth the next year.
Yeah. To the Grizzlies credit, I feel like they were recently one of those teams and they kept winning.
Yes. But like the Knicks from 2021 come to mind where they were the 4 seed, and then the next year they were out of the playoffs. The Hawks that same year were the 5 seed and then kind of fell off the year after.
But aren't the Knicks the favorite in the East this year?
That's what Bobby Marks said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they got Jalen Brunson, so it
literal highlight of the season for the Knicks.
Yeah. Speaking of Memphis, they are next up. And I couldn't decide between Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, so I put them both. I think that once they get through the Jaw suspension, their lineup of Jaw, Bane, Jaren, and then either Clark or Adams, once those guys get healthy, is pretty set. And they've kind of been in this position for a few years where they're just trying to figure out that 5th spot. Kind of reminds me of like where the Thunder were at, though they're not that as good as them. But back in the KD and Russ days, they could just never quite figure out who could play that 2 spot next to KD, Russ, Ibaka, and Perkins. Like they went through a bunch of different guys, and can Smart or Kennard be that guy where it makes sense with the team? Smart kind of has the profile of similar to a Dylan Brooks type of player. He probably isn't as suited to guard wings as Brooks was. So I wonder if the Bain, Smart trio works at the same time as well as the kind of Bain, Brooks trio did. But if it does, or if it works better, if he can sort of, he's a better passer than Brooks is for sure. I mean, most of the NBA is a better passer than Dylan Brooks is, but Marcus Smart is, I think his passing is a very underrated trait. I think the Celtics are honestly going to miss it this year. And if he can help them as like a kind of vet presence, that will be helpful. And if Luke Kennard can step in and be like that fifth option as kind of a dead eye shooter, that helps as well. Though that defensive trio of Kennard, Bain, and Joss certainly isn't something to write home about. But it just kind of still feels like this team is just waiting to trade for like an OG Anunoby type of player. And I don't know if they ever will. And if they don't, I'm not sure what the like absolute ceiling of this current core team is. Basically, I'm just really interested to see what the Marcus Smart trade does for them, because it was definitely an interesting move and it could work very well, but also the fit might be a little weird.
Nothing to add. I'm with you on those points. Just one note. I wouldn't be surprised if in a year we view Jaren Jackson Jr. as a better playoff player than Joel Embiid.
I thought you were going to say John Morant, but yeah.
Well, yeah, and Ja, it's sort of like the Wemby and the Zion stuff. Like if Ja is in the right headspace and he's able to play and take care of himself, I think he's going to be Ja.
Yeah.
But his health also scares the shit out of me.
Yeah. I mean, the Jaren stuff from the World Cup has just been nuts. Like how he's just, I mean, him and FIBA, where he can like totally
Yeah.
like knock the ball off the rim and just like be so physically dominant. He's kind of like a supercharged Chris Bosh over there or something. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Steven Adams' injury was a big blow to their season. If there's any silver lining, it's that Jaren got more and more reps being the five,
Yeah.
which you've got to assume long term is where he'll be greatest.
And Clark too, not just Adams. Like
Yeah.
their lineups usually when Adams was out was Clark and Jaren together, and those have really good sort of lineup metrics. But the fact they weren't able to do either of them, and it was just kind of all Tillman and Jaren. And I like Tillman. I think he's a really good player. But yeah, I'm curious to see what they look like and if they're kind of the same team as they were the past couple of years, or if they can take another step forward, because they're kind of yeah, we saw last year, they're kind of reaching the point where it's like they were a fun young team, but now it's like they got to actually do something. So we'll see if they do.
If we're talking swing the scales, it's Kenny Lofton. You said it's make or break for Zion. For guys like Zion and Kenny Lofton, it's more like steak or cake.
Yes. All right. One team left in the West. The reigning champion Denver Nuggets. We don't have to see them like swing towards the title because we just saw them do it, but they did lose Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, kind of their sixth and seventh most important players from this past year. Their starting five is rock solid. We already know that five can win a title and is one of the best lineups in the league, if not the best. But I still think they need to replace that Brucey B piece. Jeff to a lesser extent, but Bruce was very important for them, especially in that Lakers series, and he had some real moments in the finals as well. So Peyton Watson, Christian Brown is one of those guys going to step up into that role. They're kind of banking on some of their young guys doing that. Then they traded specifically into the draft this year to draft a couple more guys to try to fill out their rotation between Strother and Jalen Pickett, who I didn't scout, but Strother at least is like a shooter. Basically, yeah, between Peyton Watson and Christian Brown, can those guys soak up what Bruce Brown and Jeff Green did last year, where they can just kind of man the fort as long as the starting five isn't all on the court together?
I think MPJ is my choice because I think he has the most room to grow of anyone like firmly in their core. And even it feels like even when he's taking bad shots, he's shooting 40% from three. He's a guy who was it before? It was, I think, McDaniels. I said, I want to see average more than two free throws a game. MPJ's never gone above 2.2. He averaged a free throw and a half in the finals. With his body, there's no reason he shouldn't be a more consistent rebounder, a more consistent defender, and a more consistent free throw guy. Um, because every year it feels like now there are weeks, short bursts where we think MPJ has taken a step as a defender,
Yeah.
or he strings together a couple double doubles, but it's never consistent. And he's the guy who could take another step or two and a half and take the Nuggets ceiling to a whole nother level.
Yeah. You know what? That's probably the smart pick because for them, it's like they just won the title. So the swing is like, are they a dynasty? And I think
Yeah.
he is the swing piece to them being a dynasty because we know what Jokic is. We know what Murray is, KCP and Gordon. Like we know what all of those
Yeah.
guys are, and we know that they're what they're going to be for the next. I mean, KCP might fall off, but those other guys I think are going to be who they are for the next 5+ years.
Yeah.
Maybe Gordon will fall off if his athleticism declines, but he's still pretty young. MPJ is the one where if he basically just turns into a 6'10 Klay Thompson, which right now he kind of is that offensively, at least the current version of Klay Thompson. But if he
But
can,
he doesn't have the same off ball impact.
no, he doesn't. If he can find a way, because like once the ball's in his hands, it feels like he's kind of like a 6'10 Klay Thompson in terms of what he's able to do. But
Yeah.
yeah, if he can sort of find all the ways to impact the game as someone like Klay does in terms of movement and
Yeah. Take notes from Aaron Gordon. He's not miles athletically behind Aaron Gordon, at least
mhm,
measurables wise. And yeah, I think I was thinking about the 2022 Warriors and how like I don't like your Christian Brown pick, which you kind of just admitted, like, the MPJ pick makes sense. But the reason I don't love your Christian Brown pick is I probably would have said Kuminga before the Warriors won in 2022.
mhm,
And then Kuminga was disappointing, and it was Andrew Wiggins who was shockingly good,
yeah,
and probably outside of Steph's greatness, the reason they won that title.
yeah,
And MPJ, because I think Aaron Gordon is who he is, which is an awesome, you know, off ball star role guy, so to
yeah,
speak. MPJ is the one who could be Wigginsy.
yes, yeah, and then he's also still a health risk. Like he's been in the league. How many years has he been in the league? He was drafted in 2018, I think. So he's been in the league 5 years. He's had like two healthy seasons, 2.5 healthy seasons, 2.5 not so healthy seasons. Like he's a bit of a coin flip of whether you're going to get a good MPJ year or not health wise. So, I mean, if he's not healthy, they get thin pretty quickly. Um, Murray, Jokic, and Gordon is still just such a difficult triumvirate to stop. Like it's not like him not being healthy would make them not a playoff team, but I do think they need him to be healthy to win a title with how they're currently constructed. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And also to like play 65 games, be a regular season beast so that Jamal Murray, a couple of years removed from this surgery, Jokic getting closer to 30 aren't gassed by the time you get to another deep playoff run.
definitely. Yeah. All right. Well, that was all 15 teams in the West. We're going to be back at a
Oh,
later.
this sucks because all the teams that I prepped for were East. I still got Hawks, Celtics, Nets, Hornets, Bulls, Cavs, and Pistons.
All right. And Orlando, I assume, right?
No, Jalen Suggs.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that was my guy too. But yes, we'll be back at a later date with part two of the swingers for the East, but this was the swingers for the West. And yeah, thanks for listening. Samuel, anything to add at the end?
No, I love international basketball, and this Kobe shit with Rondé Hollis Jefferson is weird.
Yeah, well, why is he playing for Jordan? Is he from Jordan?
Um, I mean, that's not what's weird to me. At first, I thought
Yeah,
it was Jordan Brand. I didn't even realize it was international basketball because I was asleep when it happened. But
yeah.
Yeah, he's incredibly skilled. And also, if what I take from the Rondae Hollis Jefferson stuff is not is not that he should have been the best Blazer ever. It's that the skill floor in the NBA to be a real guy is so incredibly high. And that Rondae Hollis Jefferson is doing that against pros. And in the NBA, he's like a real liability offensively.
Yeah.
And it like is reduced to like lovable hustle guy.
Yeah.
Tells you a lot just about the skill level that they're at this stage.
Yeah. But if they played in the 80s, they would have been broken.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Barkley reinforced that on Simmons. I do agree with him though. Like the one thing Barkley said, the old dude take that he had that I couldn't disagree with is like, yeah, the bad boy Pistons would have hospitalized Steph.
Yes.
And it's less that I think Steph wouldn't have been special in some other way. But those like old man Steph takes are interesting. I'll just leave it at that.
It's very fair. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll be back with part 2 of the Swingers for the Eastern Conference. Peace.